All right, it's 9:16, and I call the July 11th, 2024 meeting of the SDCERS Board of Administration Business and Governance Committee to order. As our committee chair, Bobby Spoon, is absent today, I'll be filling in as interim chair. Rosie, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Mr. Acting Chair, we do have a quorum with Roberto Spoon, as you so eloquently already mentioned, absent.
Great. Moving to Section 3, public comment. Rosie, do we have any public comment today?
No, Mr. Acting Chair, we don't have any public comment for today's meeting.
Moving to Section 4, business and governance action items. We have 3 action items on today's agenda. Our first action item is staff's recommendation to establish an education networking plan. Greg, would you please introduce this item?
Certainly. Through board discussions, we put on our action plan for the coming year networking events to help build board relationships and get to know each other better so that we can just have a stronger collegial board. That makes me smile because I believe we already have a strong collegial board, but I think having networking events to build those relationships makes a lot of sense, and I think will improve us in our governance. So at our last meeting, one of our members, Mr. Wynn, asked us, hey, can we accelerate this? Greg, at the next meeting, can you bring forth your plan? And so I was thinking about it, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to not only get to know each other and do networking activities, but also put some education into it. And so the idea was for 3 times a year for the board to have special meetings on an evening where we could get together and have some networking time, have dinner, and then have some education as a speaker come in to talk about various topics pertinent to overseeing and governing this organization. The 3 times of the year, generally we have a board retreat in February. So the evening before the board retreat, we would get together to have a networking opportunity and to have some education the evening before our board retreat, and then also in April and in August. And so that would be kind of on the same schedule that we have our board meetings, but in April it would be the second Wednesday, in August the second Wednesday. And we would plan for those dates, but then again, we would always check with everybody's calendar, and if we got enough critical mass, we would hold the event. If not, we would try to reschedule it. So again, this is supposed to be a good fun thing, an enjoyable thing, and hopefully everybody can attend. So if the board does support this approach, I would be working with Rosie to line something up for this coming August, which would be Wednesday, August 14th. We try to have a networking and educational event. And that's the plan.
Well, I'll let you know I'm not available that day, so. We'll see what else our schedules look like. But thank you, Greg. Do we have any questions or comments from the committee members?
One quick question. Could I suggest that we also include the members of the Internal Audit Committee in that?
Including the audit committee? Yeah, that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any others? See none. Just need a motion and a second. Moved by Paul Oates, and I've seconded the item. Please vote.
With all votes in, Mr. Acting Chair, this motion passes 4-0.
Thank you, Rosie. Our second action item is staff's recommendation to approve a contract with All-Star AC to replace and relocate the 3rd floor cooling system. Michelle, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. A little background on this action item. SDCERS moved into the building in 2006, and at that time, IT staff, along with the server room, moved into the 3rd floor. That was 18 years ago, and since then, equipment in that server room has been replaced and upgraded at some point in time. What remains original is the 8-ton Liebert HVAC system. So per the recommendation of our maintenance vendor, this unit has reached its useful life, and if we experience any failure, finding parts is going to both be challenging and costly. Additionally, that unit is installed in the ceiling above the suite the IT group used to occupy. We now are located 8th floor with the operations. Since we no longer occupy that suite, scheduling quarterly maintenance, it has to be coordinated with the building management and the current occupants. This also raises concern of accessibility in the case there was failure and we needed emergency or immediate access. So based on the recommendation of our HVAC vendor, the IT group met with 3 different HVAC companies that are approved by our management company. The challenge that this project faces is that above our server room, we have very limited rafter space to have a like unit installed above there. So of the 3 vendors we met with, only one was able to provide a solution that was cost effective. They recommended that we have 2 3-ton units installed versus the single 8-ton. We like that option as it creates redundancy. A single unit could support that room to offset the heat that's created in that room for a longer period of time than getting a temporary unit, so it creates some redundancy and some failover. Staff does not believe an RFP is the best way to select this vendor because of the building requirements and the scope of the work. Instead, staff recommends that we did our due diligence in reviewing qualified vendors and recommends the board waive board contracting policy for BBIII that requires an RFP to be issued for contracts exceeding $100,000. Rather, we recommend that we proceed with All-Star AC for the scope of this work. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Anyone like to speak on this matter?
Michelle, I'm just interested in, and by the way, I'm impressed at how you've become an expert on AC systems. This is really nice. But we lease space in the building, obviously, and we would actually be purchasing this, like I suppose we purchased the one before. So if at some point we gave up this space, it goes away. I'm just interested in how that works, the leasing versus owning stuff.
That's a good question. I'm not sure what we would do with that unit. Depends on when we, what the plan of relocating would be. We have a lot of equipment. The HVAC unit is one of many pieces of hardware that is contained in that server room, and we'd have to strategize how we'd move all that hardware into a new location.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, if you wanted to add. I was just interested in how you balance that whole thing of leasing and owning stuff.
The space.
So about a year ago, we gave up our lease space on the 7th floor, or excuse me, the 4th floor, moved up to the 8th floor. And there, we had been in that space for a very long period of time. And there was a lot of built-in screens and a lot of stuff that was in there. And when we left, the building just basically said, you got to clean it all out. We don't care what you do with it, just get rid of it. So when you move from tenant space to tenant space, basically everything that's yours, they want you to get rid of it so it's all clean, and then you move on. So if we moved out of that 3rd floor space, they would probably ask us to remove that and do something with it, whether we resell it or throw it in a dumpster. Yeah. They don't mind. When we moved up here to the 8th floor, we tried to repurpose as much as practically possible with regards to audio-visual equipment and things of that nature, and desks and chairs and those types of things. So you try to repurpose as much as you can, but some things just you can't.
Thank you.
Any other comments? All right, just need a motion and a second, please. Moved by Paul Lotz, seconded by Paul Kaufman. Please vote.
With all votes in, Mr. Chair, Acting Chair, this motion passes 4-0.
Thank you, Rosie. Our third action item is staff's recommendation to amend Board Rule 2.00 additional contributions, 10.40 hearings before the committee and board, 10.100 appeal of final decisions, Division 5 of the board rules, retirement benefits, and the conflict of interest policy. Johnny, would you please introduce these?
Yeah, of course. Good morning again. This committee regularly reviews all governance material at least every 3 years, so I appreciate your diligence in doing that with us. I do want to highlight 3 items of this pack, Rule 2.00, Rule 5.00, and the Conflicts of Interest Code proposed changes. Rule 2.00 has a lot of history. It is the rule that addresses the San Diego Municipal Code's two provisions that allow general members and safety members to provide additional post-tax contributions to create additional benefits from SDCERS. It's something that's in the municipal code and, as Chris pointed out, also in the charter. But the history of this provision, this really unutilized provision, is unique. It started in the 1970s. Around 2000, mid-2000s, 2010-ish, it looks like some staff had allowed a few members to provide pre-tax contributions, which the municipal code doesn't provide and is actually not allowed under the IRS regulations. So somewhere between our tax council advice to staff, we understood that as not allowing additional contributions, which then reflects the current write-up of Rule 2.00. So as of 2018, the rule has said that members are not allowed to make any additional contributions, which is technically incorrect. They're allowed to make post-tax contributions up to the IRS regulation limit, which includes all total post-tax contributions. So we are addressing that now, and part of addressing that is understanding how would we implement this additional contributions, and to do so, we need to coordinate with the city because the city has a very robust deferred compensation program. I contribute to 401k, you can contribute post-tax contributions through other deferred vehicles at the city. And given the dormancy of this program and the need to coordinate with the city, we've reached out to the city saying, you have this arcane benefit on the books. How do we want to address this? Do you want to continue this program or not? So we haven't received a formal response back, or really any response, but staff doesn't want to leave the rule wrong right now. So right now we're asking the board to change the rule to allow a member, a city and safety city member, to make make post-tax additional contributions. And to the extent when we hear back from the city and how, then I'll revisit this board rule to see how we would administer it if that's ultimately what we will be doing. So I want to address that. Do you want me to talk about 5.00 and the other conflicts of interest code before we start?
Maybe have Chris make his comments
Sure.
first.
So this is an issue that really kind of concerns me, not in the specifics of the matter, but in a general sense. When I first came on the board, I went through the municipal code sections regarding what makes up the plan, to try to understand them as best as possible, as well as reading the city charter and a variety of other, and 400 pages of SDCERS policies. And I came across this, and I asked at the time the deputy CEO, okay, so how does this work? And she said, well, we don't do that because the IRS doesn't allow it. So that was in May of 2023. More recently, I've asked Johnny to send me advanced copies of the policies that we're going to review so I could take a look at them, and this one came up, and so I asked Johnny, is that IRS proscription still in place? And to Johnny's credit, he went and checked with a tax attorney, I guess, and found out, yeah, that's not right. And so we've been denying this benefit to members for 15 years or something like that. Who knows? I don't know. For some significant period of time. And I mean, part of what concerns me about it is this is a compliance issue of the city sets the benefits essentially in a contract with its employees as to what they can expect to get from the retirement system. And our obligation is simply to ensure that they are delivered. And in this case, we didn't, or we haven't. Now, I don't know how many members would have taken us up on this. Personally, I would much rather contribute to a guaranteed defined benefit in retirement than a 401k, but other people may have different opinions, and that's fine. I don't think it's up to us to go to the city and say, do you still want to do this or not? It's in the charter and it's in the municipal code, and at that point, as being part of the plan, it's just our obligation to effectuate what the plan says. So I understand that it may be complicated to deal with, maybe the city has got a lot of other things going on and whatever, but that doesn't remove our obligation to address the rights of the members under the plan.
May I
Yeah, go ahead.
throw some comments out there? I agree with everything you said, Chris. That makes a lot of sense. And it was really under my direction to staff. I said, my understanding is that the plan sponsors are responsible for defining what benefits they would like to provide their employees. There's a whole market basket of them, and one of them just happens to be retirement benefits, which we administer. And so knowing that my understanding of the history of this additional contributions as we studied it more, it was put in before the city created those robust defined contribution plans. And so as we're here to partner and collaborate with our plan sponsors, is going back to the city to check them is like, is this a benefit you'd still like to provide to your employees, yes or no? And if the answer is yes, that's great. We figure out how to coordinate it with the city and what's it mean to administer it, and is that there's going to be a lot of different business rules that will need to come back to the board to create to start doing that. If the answer is no, then we say, well, then please amend your plan document. The city, the port and the airport, the defined benefit plan is a living document. They do change it from time to time, sometimes increasing benefits, sometimes decreasing benefits. So to me, I agree with you, is that if we hear nothing back from the city, I think you're right. We have an obligation to administer that program. But I think this is an inflection point where it makes sense to reach back to the plan sponsor to say, is this the plan design you intended? Is this something that you would like us to move forward or not? And so I think it makes sense to ask them that question.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that we just shove it down their throat. But on the other hand, every day that we deny a benefit to members, again, I don't know how many members would want to avail themselves of it, we're failing to follow through on our obligations under the plan. And so I think it's important that we get this sorted out expeditiously.
Oh, I'd agree. And actually, I would thank you for asking the question, because I'm not an expert in tax law. So when I read that board rule, it really didn't surprise me. Tax law is always changing, and it's convoluted, and it's hard to understand. So I appreciate you asking the question so that we could check to say, are we doing this properly, yes or no? So thank you for that.
Sure. And Johnny, just a mechanical thing. You and I exchanged some emails on this. So if we actually did this, you looked back to the way it was done before when it was not proper, when it was pre-tax or whatever, and you found that it became like a separate line item annuity, essentially. Is that how it went?
Yeah, it's historically a underutilized provision. I understand that we only have 4 people who have taken advantage of it. And what it looks to be is when that member retires, we provide an annuity of that benefit, giving that additional contributions back to them.
So what in practical terms would be the difference between that and buying airtime?
Airtime would affect your service credit and your benefit formula. So that is sort of the heart and soul, your basic retirement benefit. This would be more of like a cash balance plan.
So almost like going to an insurance company and buying an annuity for retirement or something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
We currently do that with drop programs. So if you are a member with a drop balance, you can either take it lump sum or we can convert it into an annuity. And there's lots of rules about how do you convert that into an annuity? You know, how do you price it? And so that's when I talk about if we move forward with this program, that's the type of SDCERS that would be in our sphere of influence. How do we establish those rules for establishing that annuity?
A couple questions over here. Is this on? Maybe you can hear me anyways. So it sounds like this is already on the book, so would we be voting just to confirm what is already in place before you go to the city process?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Paul. As proposed right now, staff is just asking to clean up 2.00, which says that a city and safety and general member can make additional contributions. So it would correct the rule to match the municipal code. But what it doesn't say right now is how would we administer that benefit? What would that benefit be? And so that's the next step.
Okay, so discussing with the city, figuring out what the IRS contribution limits are and how they would like to go about processing this additional
Yeah,
retirement.
I think it would be wrong of us to start accepting post-tax contributions in excess of the IRS limits, which would just fall upon the member paying penalties for that. So we want to avoid that.
And were you saying that this would be included in the calculations for service credits and maybe increase the years, or would this be a completely separate thing such as the COLA annuity?
The latter, it would be like the COLA annuity.
And the current COLA annuity, it has nothing to do with this 1976.
That's correct. It's
Okay.
an additional provision.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Johnny, you mentioned there's 4 members that are currently in this plan. Are they still active working, or they're retired and
I
receiving?
understand they're all retired, Tom. So they're all receiving their additional contributions back as part of their
And there's
retirement benefit.
no active working members in this?
Not that I know of.
Got it.
Just a comment, Chris, you mentioned, your what you would prefer as far as guaranteed retirement with, I think you were referencing, you feel like in your situation, a 401k 457 is more of a guarantee. If this is tied to an annuity, that would certainly be a higher degree of guaranteed income versus something subject to market fluctuations like the 401k 47. So,
Yeah, and I think that's right, Paul, and I think that, this is obviously sort of an arcane area of our plan that people have been unaware of up to now. And I think that if in fact we get it back on track and it's established and people know that it's an option and they can sit there with their financial manager and say, do I want to put money in a 401k or do I want a guaranteed annuity along with my defined benefit? I think there's a chance that a lot more people would be interested. So, just for the reasons you're saying. And to my understanding, what we're doing today, all we're doing here is removing language from the policy that's incorrect. I mean, it's factually incorrect that the IRS doesn't allow it, and so whatever. And so we pretty much have to do that piece.
Agreed.
So it'd be effective as of tomorrow, board approval, if that is what happens. What if someone comes in on Monday and wants to be a part of this? How does that conversation work?
You pushed your button first. I'll
All
let
right.
you talk.
Well, there is no program to sign anybody up. So we would say that we're working with the city to affect this program. So they could have the desire to join, but there's actually nothing to join at this point.
Great, thank you. Any other comments?
Can I quickly talk about 5.00 and the conflicts of interest code? I just want to
Yes.
highlight two things. It'll take another minute.
Sure.
5.00 addresses retirement applications, and we just wanted, as staff wanted to make clear to the members what it means to apply for retirement and when those decisions become irrevocable. So we're asking the rule to be amended to state that the selected date of retirement, retirement benefit options, and survivor continuing designations are irrevocable after SDCERS has made payment to the member in their drop account or actually start paying them. You can't under-retire. That's been a question sometimes of members, and we want to just make that clear so that way they can plan accordingly. And the last change is a proposed change to the conflicts of interest code for Category 1 filers. That's not y'all. Y'all are statutory filers, but the Category 1 filers are a step down like me. And the current requirement is, appreciate the humility for myself. The current reporting for the statement of economic interest is that Category 1 filers report any ownership of security of 1% or more in a security that SDCERS owns. And that has been a very difficult provision to address, one, because not everyone knows what SDCERS owned at one time, and we own so many different things at so many different points. I think it's very difficult for a Category 1 filer to properly address that. But maybe more importantly is it's not consistent with conflicts of interest rules and laws. So I worked with fiduciary counsel, and she recommends, and I agree, that we should take out that provision because it doesn't have anything to do with that employee doing their job. It's just something that SDCERS would own, that we somehow would own, and that would be reported to. So it's out of fiduciary counsel's recommendation to remove that line. Other than that, any questions?
Yeah, John, you and I had a little bit of a discussion about some of these other policies, and the only thing I would mention is that in I think a couple of the policies, there's language about how the committee can, in a certain circumstance, accept staff's recommendation or reject staff's recommendation. And I would just like to just suggest that I feel like the reject staff recommendation is a bit harsh and it doesn't make me feel good, because I think sometimes the board may, or a committee may, want to suggest a variation. That's not in and of itself, I think, a rejection. And I think we should just avoid language that creates a conflict between board and staff, that, staff brought something in and it was rejected by, the board. So just something to think going forward. I just think some softer language would be nice. But I'm okay to vote in favor of this. I'd just like to, migrate that way over time.
Thank you, Chris.
Anyone else like to speak? All right, I'll need a motion to approve in a second. Moved by Paul Lotz, seconded by Paul Kaufman. Please vote.
With our votes in, Mr. Acting Chair, this motion passes 4-0.
Thank you, Rosie. We've finished our committee action items, and we'll move on to an informational item, compliance program assessment. Johnny, would you please introduce this informational item?
Yes, thanks. Hi again. So the Ethics and Compliance Program is charged with developing and implementing operational controls to prevent illegal, unethical, improper conduct. That's a very fancy sentence for saying the compliance program's job is to help to prevent, detect, and report wrongdoing. The program actually came out of our pension crisis of the city back in the early 2000s. Because of the perception that SDCERS board members had a conflict of interest with what's going on. And from that, it's evolved. And in 2020, SDCERS' board, at staff's recommendation, kind of redesigned the program to really fit compliance best practices, which are the federal guidelines for what makes an effective program. So that was 3 years ago. In 3 years, I've thought we've done a great job, but we wanted to ask someone outside to see if we were doing a great job. So we retained Kaplan and Walker LLP, which specializes in compliance ethics programs, formulating them, assessing them, addressing them. We asked them to do an assessment of our program. And over 6 months, they've done that and have just issued their report. And here before us is the partner, Rebecca Walker, to present a summary of her findings. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning.
So
hello,
I
everyone.
want to say nice things about you before
Oh,
we talk.
please,
Is that
please
okay?
do that. Yes.
So Rebecca advises Fortune 500 companies and clients across industries, including retirement systems, looking at the development and implementation of compliance and ethics programs. She's worked with numerous organizations on the design and implementation of components of the compliance and ethics programs. She received her bachelor's degree from Georgetown, her Juris Doctorate from Harvard Law School. She is well published, as you will find out, terribly well spoken, and chairs different ethics institution conferences in New York as well as San Francisco. So thank you for coming from Santa Monica to present today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here. We have a fairly short presentation, but please feel free to interrupt with questions. No need to wait until the end, and it'll be better conversation if you please do interrupt with questions. So thank you to Johnny and Greg for having me here, but also for allowing me the honor of coming in and taking a look at the compliance program for SDCERS. I was very impressed, in particular given the size of the organization in terms of number of employees. It's probably the best compliance program for this size organization that I have ever assessed. As Johnny said, my law firm specializes in assisting organizations with their compliance programs. It's all that we do. So I spend my days assessing compliance programs for the most part. So I've seen a number of them. And for an organization of its size, this organization has done a really nice job. So it was a pleasure to come in and chat with folks. As I said, I do a lot of program assessments, and I typically follow the same methodology. It's probably the methodology that all of us compliance lawyers follow. There's nothing particularly magical about it. We talk with the ethics and compliance team and the law department at an organization. We look at a lot of documents related to the compliance program, and then we talk with employees around the organization. So for SDCERS, we talked with the senior leadership team. We spoke with folks in investments and in member benefits. We spoke with members of audit, HR, all of the functions, IT, information security, et cetera. So really tried to get a sense, not just for how the program is designed, but also how do the consumers of the compliance program, folks around the organization, perceive the program? Is it helpful? Is it helping the organization understand its legal and compliance risks and mitigate legal and compliance risks? And that's really the goal of a compliance program. It's another form of risk mitigation. So we talked with everyone with whom we thought we needed to. We came up with a number of recommendations, and in order to get to those recommendations, looked at relevant legal guidance and standards. So this is a fairly new area of law, but it's also fairly well developed, given that it's really only been around for about 40 years or so. But the sentencing guidelines, which were promulgated in 1991, and approved by Congress, they were promulgated by the Sentencing Commission, basically created an incentive for organizations to implement compliance programs by saying criminal fines for misconduct for organizations will be very high, but if the organization had a program in place to prevent misconduct, if the organization tried to be a good citizen corporation and prevent issues from occurring, then we'll credit that and give you a significant reduction in penalty. So that was really the first broad-based incentive for organizations to implement compliance programs. And along with creating that incentive, the Sentencing Commission really set out the framework for what compliance programs should look like. So we have guidance from the Sentencing Commission. The Department of Justice has also provided significant guidance for organizations on what it considers to be an effective compliance program. We looked at both of those things. We looked at relevant case law. So there's some good case law, some interesting case law that discusses your responsibility for oversight of the compliance program. So what should the board do in terms of overseeing compliance? And there's a fiduciary responsibility of a board to oversee an organization's compliance program. So for public companies, we see a lot of discussion of that in the case law, and also in California statutory law that discusses the fiduciary duties of boards for public pension funds. So we certainly wanted to take a look at that and look at your oversight of SDCERS compliance program, and then other guidance as well, and benchmarking and best practices. So we looked at a lot of different information in coming up with our recommendations and in conducting the assessment. And we looked at the program, we just for organizational purposes, divided it up into these 15 areas. And these are the elements, sort of recognized elements of an ethics and compliance program. So we looked at all of them. We won't go through each one of those in detail. I realize that hearing from a compliance lawyer is probably not the highlight of anyone's day, but I can tell you we did look at everything quite extensively. And as I mentioned, concluded that the program is really in very good shape. It certainly satisfies legal expectations, in many areas exceeds legal expectations, and the company's adopted a number of best practices, which is terrific. And as I mentioned earlier, really the most effective program for an organization of its size that the firm is familiar with. We certainly have a number of recommendations in the report, however, because we wanted to be useful and give Johnny some work to do over the next few years. So we'll just highlight some of the big recommendations. First, though, let me highlight some of the findings. So first of all, we did speak with 3 members of the board in conducting the assessment. And in our discussions with board members, in our review of documents, we're very comfortable that the independence of the function is protected by the board's oversight of the program. So because Johnny is also the general counsel, because he reports to the CEO, that relationship that Johnny has with the board really does help create a little more independence for the compliance program than you would have without the relationship that Johnny has. So that's very important to the level of independence of the program. The board is hearing a lot about compliance and about legal risks, which is great. The program has sufficient authority and resources in the firm's view. It's a small organization, but Johnny's dedicating some percentage of his time to the compliance program. And there's a compliance coordinator, Melanie, who does a great job of implementing the compliance program. So appropriate resources given the size of the organization. That's something that the Department of Justice looks at quite closely when it's evaluating a compliance program. So it's something that we always want to look at as well. We're also always concerned about access to people and information for the compliance team. Can they get to the data that they need to monitor compliance risks, for example? Can they talk with the people with whom they need to speak in order to conduct a review or an investigation? And we saw no impediments to access. So a really important factor in our deciding that the program is effective. A strong code of conduct and policies with oversight by the board, as we just heard. The compliance team has also created a lot of benchmarking opportunities and has really made an effort to sort of educate themselves on best practices in compliance law, which, again, I think is admirable. I go to a lot of compliance conferences, and I sometimes see Johnny and Melanie at those conferences. They're out there. They're learning about best practices. They're getting the continuing education. And they also, this is particularly admirable in my view, they have started sharing what they've done here and what they've learned about compliance law with other pension funds, and really sort of spreading the gospel of compliance, which is not only a great thing to do, but it also helps enrich this program. And it is strongly suggested by the Department of Justice and other regulators that organizations do that. So Johnny and Melanie have put groups together for pension funds in California to talk about ethics and compliance issues. They are doing benchmarking with other pension funds, and they're happy to sort of take calls and share information, which is certainly a best practice. So the team has done a really good job of educating themselves and helping others. There is a nice infrastructure to support reporting suspected misconduct. That's an important element of a compliance program. One of the most important elements that organizations create avenues for employees and others to report issues if they think that something is awry, and to create a level of confidentiality and non-retaliation for that type of reporting. And SDCERS has done a nice job with that. It's hard in an organization this size. When you only have 50 or so employees, it can be very frightening for an employee to speak up, right? To raise a hand and say, I think that something is wrong in this area. I think we're violating a law in this area. It's very challenging with an organization this size. And the compliance team here has really put a lot of thought into trying to make employees comfortable, a strong non-retaliation policy, and a real robust effort to communicate that policy, which is also, it's a best practice, and it's also just very important sort of from a real world perspective in order to help employees feel comfortable speaking up. I've already talked about how great the compliance team is. Also, in doing the 16 interviews that I did in conducting the assessment, it's funny because I just finished an assessment for a very large publicly held automobile company in the United States. And I spoke with maybe 60 people. But if you look at the numbers on a percentage basis, I probably have never spoken to as large a percentage of employees of an organization as I did at this organization. So we spoke with quite a few people around the organization. And more than at any other company that I have assessed, and I promise I don't say this to all my clients, the feedback I heard about senior leadership's discussion of values, commitment to business ethics and integrity just really exceeded anything that I've heard at other organizations. So there's a lot of talk about values at the All SDCERS meeting, at the town halls that are conducted. Every time an employee is given an award, it is tied to company values, and if the leader doesn't tie that award to company values, they're asked to go back and redo it. The focus on values and on business ethics is really greater than I've seen at other organizations, and the Department of Justice and other regulators really have long recognized what compliance professionals realized before, which is that compliance is important, the policies are important, but it's really the culture and senior leadership's tone at the top that drives compliance at an organization. That is the most important aspect when one is assessing a compliance program. And in that area, I think you all are in very, very good shape. Greg and the rest of the senior leadership team have worked very hard at making sure that everybody understands the importance of values to the way business is done at SDCERS. And it is, I have taken some of their practices and recommended them to other clients, so thank you for that. But really have done a very nice job, in particular the employee awards, which most organizations don't do as well. So good work there. Certainly, a commitment to continuous improvement, which is important to a compliance program and which this assessment sort of illustrates as well. And also the organization is conducting surveys to measure the culture of ethics and compliance. And if it doesn't get measured, it's hard to impact it. And so that's another important piece of the compliance program. There are surveys going on and an attempt to address any concerns that are identified in the surveys. So those are the findings. Really, in particular for an organization of this size, a wonderful compliance program in place. In terms of recommendations, so despite the fact that it's all very good, there are certainly some opportunities to make it even better. And so the report addresses a number of suggestions, recommendations for improvement, starting with executive sessions. with the chief compliance officer at least once a year. That's something that is considered a best practice. The Department of Justice recommends it. The various other regulators recommend it. It's just an opportunity for the chief compliance officer to have a conversation with independent members of the board without management present, so that if there is any concern, if there's a resource issue that maybe the CCO wants to mention independently of management, or a concern, any other type of concern, gives you a chance to do that. So it's considered a best practice and something that I think that would make sense for you all to implement. Also, a recommendation that you and the compliance team give some thought to what types of allegations you guys want to hear about on a more immediate basis, and a written protocol to address that. So if, for example, there were an allegation of fraud, how quickly does that need to get to relevant board members, probably the audit committee? It's helpful to think those questions through ahead of time before the issue arises, so that there's clarity with respect to what you all will hear and when. And there are various types of issues that you might want to include on that protocol, but I think it will be helpful to think it through and for the compliance team to maybe come to the board or relevant committee with that recommended protocol. There is a very strong ethics and compliance program charter in place. So the company has adopted a charter which really delineates the roles and responsibilities of the program, the authority of the program. I think that the team did an excellent job with the charter. I do have a recommendation that you revise that to reflect the practice of asking division leads to report to the board on significant compliance risks and controls annually. That's a practice that you all already have in place. I think it's an excellent practice. That is another practice that I have taken to other clients, actually, because ultimately, a compliance program is a risk mitigation program, right? It is about understanding where your high-level legal risks are and creating appropriate controls to mitigate those risks, and hearing from the owners, the subject matter experts, with respect to, in particular, the highest level compliance risks. I think there's sort of no substitute for that in terms of allowing the board appropriately to oversee serious risk areas for the organization and the controls with respect to serious risk areas. So you have a practice already of that occurring. I think it would be helpful to formalize and document the practice. And I'm suggesting that to all of my other clients as well. Some additional recommendations that impact you all: a requirement that the relevant board committee be notified if the chief compliance officer is terminated or if the compensation or scope of duties is negatively impacted. That just, again, protects the independence of the chief compliance officer, removes a little bit of the oversight by management, and says that the board has a certain oversight responsibility here with respect to the compliance program and the compliance officer. That is also something that's recommended by various regulatory authorities. We do have a couple of recommendations related to vendors and procurement procedures, that the organization develop procedures to govern periodic reassessment of long-term vendors. That vendors are assessed before they come on board, but it might be, you might have relationships with folks for a number of years, and so the idea here is just to reassess and do a little more due diligence during the relationship. And just that the organization continue to enhance the compliance-related procurement procedures. So those being, ensuring that the people with whom you're doing business don't have sort of issues that would make them riskier, compliance controls that are in contracts, reporting procedures for third parties, and some other areas there. Some additional recommendations: Chief Compliance Officer regularly briefing the relevant committee of the board about the compliance program. So Johnny does present information to the board about the compliance program, but I heard from the board members with whom I spoke that it might be helpful to do more of that. And, maybe at your educational retreat, for example, you guys could hear more about compliance. Again, I realize it's not the most exciting topic that you deal with, but maybe we could do something to make it a little more fun. Combined with cocktails, it's always more interesting. So, there just a little more education about compliance oversight responsibilities and the role that the board plays and what the compliance program looks like. So all of that, I think, is helpful, and just a little more, I think, would be helpful to the board. Moving to some of the recommendations related to staff, I think it would be helpful to talk to the staff a little more as well about the compliance program. What is its role? What is its responsibilities? Compliance is, it feels very broad, and for organizations where the compliance program is fairly new, we often hear things like, compliance with what exactly? And it's a great question, right? What does compliance own? What does the compliance team own in terms of policies and procedures and in monitoring and auditing? There are lots of risks that are owned by other functions in the organization that are owned by the business. What is the role of compliance with respect to monitoring the compliance of those functions in the business? So defining the compliance program, I think the team has actually done a nice job of that in the charter. It's a continuous organic process. That process will continue, but it's important to make sure that the consumers of this program also understand the role of compliance. So making sure that the staff really understands the role and responsibilities of the program, and the board understands it is important. So we just are recommending that Johnny and Melanie do a little bit more of that type of education. And additional communications and training on appropriate subject matter areas as well. And then the last recommendation on this slide, that the organization develops supervisor training. Most compliance issues are reported to an employee supervisor in the first instance. And so it's really important to help supervisors understand what to do with those issues. In addition, just as Greg sets the tone at the top for the entire organization, somebody's supervisor, a function leader, they're setting the tone for their part of the organization. And so it's important to help those folks understand the importance of setting the right tone for their function or their part of the organization, and how to do that, right? How do you recognize employees for sort of going above and beyond with respect to ethics and compliance? How do you respond to an employee who comes to you with a concern? So that type of training we find can be very helpful, and we make a recommendation that the organization think about implementing that. We also recommend that over the longer term, the organization consider developing data analytics capabilities to enhance monitoring and decision-making. We are entering, perhaps have already entered, a brave new world with respect to data analytics, thanks to artificial intelligence. And I think that it provides promise, but also risk. And so just suggesting that I think the organization is dealing with that from other perspectives, but we're suggesting that also from the compliance perspective. The organization think about how it can utilize data analytics to enhance compliance processes. And I think there is a lot of promise in this area. I actually got a call yesterday from a private equity firm to chat about some investments they're about to make with respect to artificial intelligence and compliance. So I think we're going to see a lot of movement in the next few years, and I just recommend that this team stay on top of that. With respect to sort of making compliance part of the culture, it already is, but sort of more fully embedded in the culture, we find that it is helpful to incorporate compliance considerations into performance evaluations. So we are recommending that compliance partner with HR to try to do that. Also, I mentioned earlier that there are surveys being conducted with respect to employees' perceptions of the compliance program, which is great. I think that there are more benefits to be reaped in that area, and so we're recommending a more formal compliance survey that touches on additional topics. So things like do you know how to report suspected misconduct? Would you be comfortable reporting suspected misconduct? That question's already included, actually, but it's helpful to ask that one. Perceptions of fairness and consistency and discipline. That gets to employees' perceptions of organizational justice, which is important to encouraging reporting. Awareness of policies. There are lots of areas we could ask about. Sort of, do employees think that leadership sets the right tone at the top for the organization, or leadership of their function or division, which allows you to sort of identify areas of the organization that might need a little support with respect to ethics and compliance, culture question. So that just, conducting those surveys allows the organization to identify any issues and build on the culture that already exists. We're also suggesting a compliance working group with the other functions and the business to sort of get a nice team together who could assist with implementing new policies, with thinking about risk, with thinking about controls. It's something that a lot of organizations do, and it seems to work well. And we actually just got guidance from the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Health and Human Services, not exactly relevant here, but it's guidance that really is sort of broadly applicable, that discusses the importance of compliance committees. So I think there's some good benchmarking and also some government guidance that suggests this is a good idea. And then lastly, a third-party code of conduct, which a lot of organizations have in place. It's sort of like your employee code, but it contains a discussion of sort of expectations of vendors, other third parties with respect to sort of their commitment to ethics and compliance. I think that's everything. So it was, as I said, it really was a pleasure to meet with folks around the organization, to pick up some good tips for my own practice and my other clients, and to hear about all the great work that is being done here. And again, for an organization of this size, very impressive what has happened in the last few years in terms of the commitment to ethics and compliance.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. Would anyone like to speak on this matter?
Thanks. That was great. And also good to have an A+ on the report card.
Yes.
You mentioned this question of compliance with what? What are you really talking about here? And you talked about a lot of high-level stuff, DOJ and all the rest of that. Does this filter down to compliance with pretty much anything that we're obligated to follow?
It does ultimately. I mean, the part of the goal of a compliance program is to understand what are the compliance obligations and who owns them. So that's part of the exercise that one undertakes when you're implementing a compliance program. So the compliance team isn't primarily responsible for all of the compliance that happens at the organization, but it should have some insight into who is responsible and how well are they doing at that, and what monitoring can the compliance team do to sort of ensure that that's happening. So that's part of the framework of a compliance program. I would also say that just because of limitations of resources, the programs tend to focus more on higher level risks because you just really can't. It would take another 50 employees to sort of focus on absolutely everything. So there is an understanding by the regulators that you have to make this a risk-based exercise. And in reality, it does, from a practical perspective, really have to be a risk-based exercise. So everything but with those caveats.
So on the agenda item previously, we talked about an issue where we basically determined we weren't compliant and apparently hadn't been for a while. Do you have any suggestions on how we could avoid that sort of thing going into the future?
Well, I will say I I don't think that we can guarantee that you will avoid noncompliance. The best that any organization can do is, well, first of all, when those issues arise, identify them, face them head on, figure out the best resolution, and do a bit of a root cause analysis to understand, wait, how did we get that wrong for the last 15 years? And if hopefully glean some lessons from that root cause analysis as to, how we can improve all of our compliance systems going forward. So with that particular situation, I mean, I'm not familiar with it beyond the discussion that you all had this morning, but if there were some, let's say a root cause analysis indicates that there's an opportunity to sort of do periodic reviews of the sort of, compliance with the charter versus the statutory requirements.
Right.
Maybe artificial intelligence will allow us to do that on an annual basis. But there, the idea with a compliance program is not that you will prevent all misconduct, but that when these issues arise, we will try to understand what allowed the noncompliance to occur and fix it.
Got it. And thank you for that. And I agree. I think it is important to, look at something like that as an example and say, might there be something else lurking out there that we haven't seen because it's so obscure or whatever it may be? And then the last question, and I understand that we're a real small organization, but is it best practice to have your general counsel be your chief compliance officer? And I ask that because I guess really part of the role of the general counsel is to protect the organization legally in various ways, which I think our general counsel does very well. And then, a person comes to the chief compliance officer, who's wearing a different hat that day, and says, hey, some terrible thing happened within the organization, and it just seems like there's an inherent conflict there that is not good.
Mr. Brewster, you have beautifully identified a very big controversy in the compliance profession. You put your finger right on the hot spot for compliance generally. I would say, yes, there is that can be a concern at organizations. And interestingly, this is a topic that regulators discuss frequently. Some areas in some industries, they frown on having compliance in the legal department at all, although the Justice Department is much more amenable to that as in a sort of broad-based way, because there are a lot of synergies between compliance and legal as well, right? I mean, the idea primarily is compliance with laws and regulations. So housing that in the law department creates a lot of synergies. For an organization the size of this organization, I think it's sort of, in particular in the early days of a compliance program, early years of a compliance program, there's probably no better place to put it. But you're right that there can be, there can be different interests between the general counsel who wants to protect the organization and a chief compliance officer who has a slightly different mandate. But having said that, there are a lot of organizations much larger than SDCERS with very mature programs where the compliance function is still within the legal department. It's about 60% is my guess. The data is sort of all over the map, but around 60% of organizations house compliance in legal. What some organizations do to create slightly more independence for the function is to create reporting for the compliance director. In your case, the position is titled compliance coordinator, who can sort of bypass the general counsel if necessary to report issues, let's say, or report a concern or a potential conflict. That is part of the protection, the independence protection for the function. So, I mean, look, at General Motors, the compliance officer is not the general counsel, but he reports to the general counsel. So at Chevron, the compliance officer is not the general counsel, but he reports to the general counsel. So it's pretty common to have compliance in law, even at very large organizations with very mature programs. But it's helpful to have that additional opportunity to get to the board. And that's why your role is so important, actually, because regardless of what function compliance is in, ultimately, Craig is that person's sort of ultimate boss at the organization. You all are the fail-safe. You all, the board, provides that opportunity for independence in the function, and that's how it's protected. I mean, is it possible that in 10 years or 5 years or 3 years, when this program is even a little more mature, either there's a chief compliance officer who's reporting to the general counsel, that's a possibility, or the compliance director has a stronger relationship with the board, that's another possibility. There are ways to get there. I think given the size of this organization and the level of relative youth of the compliance program, the positioning makes sense. I know that was very long, I apologize.
Yeah, thank you. I think I asked if it was best practice, but that's okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? All right, thank you, Rebecca and Johnny. We appreciate your efforts in improving SDCERS compliance program and culture. And thank you, Greg, and all the leadership staff for a job well done. So we finish our committee information items and we'll move on to reports. Victoria, our interim member services director, would you please provide your report?
Good morning. I'm Victoria Fedelizo, the interim member services director. First, I want to congratulate Sarema Valenzuela on career advancing from assistant management analyst to associate management analyst last month. Sarema started off in our call center as a retirement assistant, which is one of our call center representatives, in November of 2018. She promoted to the call center supervisor in May of 2021, and then promoted yet again to retirement counselor just over a year later in July of 22. For those of you who are on the board in September of 22, you may remember that Sarema was also the winner of the city's all tuition paid scholarship to earn her bachelor's degree at National University. And she has been taking night classes ever since in pursuit of a degree. She is now in the midst of only a handful of courses before she will graduate with a bachelor's in public administration. In a nutshell, Sarema has been a wonderful and most impressive addition to the member services team and to SDCERS as a whole. I also want to congratulate one of our call center representatives, Krista Rue, on career advancing from clerical assistant 2 to retirement assistant. Krista has been with SDCERS call center since 2021 and has worked out of class several times as a call center supervisor. At the risk of sounding repetitive and maybe a little braggy, I have two final congratulations to shout out. Supervising retirement counselor Sarah Levy and retirement counselor Selene Rodriguez both received Employee of the Quarter awards for the last quarter of fiscal year 2024. They earned this award due to their relentless work on Phase 3 of Proposition B. These two have stayed on top of over 100 separated city employees during the 60 days between March 15th and May 14th in order to ensure they met their funding deadline to purchase their prior city time. This entailed phone calls and emails to provide instructions, follow-up phone calls and emails to keep things moving, answering questions, working with outside financial institutions to complete rollovers, etc. All this was in addition to their normal job responsibilities and regular counseling appointments. Moving on to other personnel matters, you may recall that the call center has been frequently short-staffed for several months. However, the good news is we recently conducted interviews to fill the vacant positions. We're hoping to have 2 additional positions filled by the end of this month. Once we are fully staffed and the new hires are trained, We expect call wait times to decrease. It has been an exceptionally busy year for our call center, and they have done a praiseworthy job considering they have often had only 1 to 3 staff members available to take calls on top of their additional duties. Lastly, you can see in the action plan for fiscal year 2025, I'm leading the project on having our member hard files, which have been stored in an off-site location for many years, brought back to be scanned. This project consists of scanning 1,200 boxes that contain 15 to 20 member files each, as well as a variety of administrative documents. Each file needs to be prepped, meaning no staples or anything that will jam the scanners, and then reviewed each document through our imaging QA in our system before importing to the individual members' documentum files. We expect this project to be completed by the end of fiscal year 2026. Although this will create additional work for our call center staff, it will cut storage cost fees. All other updates can be found in the Member Services Staff Report. Thank you, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Go ahead, Chris.
Just want to say, great job on sorting out that ACH issue.
Oh, yeah.
That was really nicely done, and I appreciate that. And also, I noticed on the call center that you said, because you had a whole, for the variety of reasons you said, that something like 30% of the callers drop off, hang up because they didn't get to somebody or whatever. Do we have a, technologically, do we have some sort of a callback system where you can say, call me back when somebody's available or whatever?
Currently, we do not.
Okay.
We have looked into getting that feature within AWS. It is going to be discussed at a later time.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Victoria. And we'll invite Sandra up to provide the Benefits Administration Division report.
We're seersucker for you, Chris. Nice. Next year it'll be a bow tie. Yes. You have my BA status report in front of you, but I did want to provide a couple of quick updates. We received confirmation from the Port District that their new plan has passed both chambers of the California Legislature and is sitting on the governor's desk for signature. They are actively working on the plan amendment, and we're looking forward to working with them to ensure a smooth implementation of the plan. Also very excited to be able to use that really cool testing tool that we built earlier this year for the other new plan that we just implemented. The retiree health transition is moving really quickly. Benefit Outsourcing Solutions, or BOSS, has just been eagerly gobbling up everything that we've given them and asking for more and more data from us. In addition to the weekly implementation meetings that we're having between BOSS and Risk Management and SDCERS, I'm also meeting weekly with Michelle Wegner and Norma Frank from IT to ensure that the IRIS transition is smooth also, and also taking into account the ongoing data sharing that we're going to need to be providing to BOSS moving forward after the implementation. We are hopeful that we will see their member-facing website soon. That is in the last of the design phase, so that'll be an exciting milestone. And if all goes as planned, hopefully we will be notifying the membership in early fall of this transition in anticipation of the November open enrollment period. And then lastly, you have in your board materials the annual overpayment and underpayment in excess of $1,000 report. This year, the majority of those underpaid benefits were related to the reciprocal FAS issue. And then we continue to have challenges with the late reporting of deaths. So there's several death overpayments in that report as well. But a bit of good news, in the members owing in excess of $10,000 report, you'll see that the recent $15,000 death overpayment was fully satisfied and repaid. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any questions or comments? Chris?
I just want to share with the committee that this handover of retiree health care is an issue of great concern to both the Retired Fire and Police Association and the Retired Employees Association. And, they're very concerned about, obviously retirees are concerned about their health care and how it's going to be administered. And I just wanted to share with you that there's been a really good outreach from SDCERS staff, including Greg, as a matter of fact, but Sandra et al., and in terms of getting together with them and making them a part of the process, so they don't feel like they're just being told to wait and see if it works out. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited about it. I think the retirees are really going to enjoy these enhanced features that they're going to get.
Well, let's hope so.
Yes.
Thank you, Sandra, and we'll invite Michelle up for the IT report.
Good morning again. A few accomplishments I wanted to highlight. The project to upgrade our backup solution and implement some infrastructure changes to segment new backup server from our local storage area network is complete. This infrastructure change provides some added protection to our local backups in the event there was ever corruption in our SAN or a malware incident. Along with this upgrade and the new server, backup schedules were reviewed and fine-tuned to ensure that we're meeting business recovery point objectives. I'd like to thank both Sean Kilpack and Eric Cheatham, our server engineer from ZenSAR, for this accomplishment. Our application services manager, Norma Frank, completed the upgrade of the OnBase solution. This is the software package that you're all using here for the voting client, but it also does our agenda, minutes, and streaming of our meetings. It integrates into our audio-video components and making this a pretty complicated system. I'd like to also recognize Blanca Gomez from CGI. Much of the success of this project was due to Blanca. She went beyond and above her expertise in her area of responsibility to make sure this project was successful, and so for that I want to thank you. We also recently concluded our annual network penetration testing, which you'll hear more details about in closed session. This is an annual test that the IT team coordinates. We typically rotate vendors annually as each company provides varying test results and execute those tests in different methods. This year with Security Pursuit, we've been very pleased with the level of review. More on those findings in closed session, but in the meantime, the team's been working on remediating their recommendations and findings. This is the first month of the fiscal year 2025, and ahead of us, IT has a very aggressive plan with several significant projects, a few that we're getting started with pretty immediately. Shortly, we'll be publishing an RFQ for the renewal of our enterprise Microsoft licensing. We leverage the County of Riverside Microsoft Master Agreement as they have negotiated preferred pricing with Microsoft for other public agencies in California to leverage. The RFQ will be a request for a quote for a reseller that will help support our migration to M365. Within the same time frame, we'll release an RFP for the integration services to assist us in that migration to M365. I anticipate this to be a multi-year project, with the first phase including the migration of our domain, Active Directory, Office, and Exchange to the cloud. Security of this environment is our highest priority, which is why we're bringing in a specialist to help us set up this infrastructure appropriately right up front. The last project I wanted to highlight is the boardroom technology upgrade. This is upgrading the various pieces of our AV environment in this room. This will be done in multiple phases across multiple years. We're going to start with the video distribution, display, and audio. And as soon as we have more information on this project, we'll be coming back to this committee for approval. I've highlighted only a few of our 20 projects that the IT team has ahead of us in the next fiscal year. This is all in addition to continuing to support normal operations such as patch and vulnerability management, release management, help desk, and et cetera. And for that, I want to thank our management team, Sean, Norma, and Joe, and all of our dedicated CGI and ZenSAR team for continuing their hard work and dedications to SDCERS. This concludes my updates, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions? Chris?
Michelle, I just want to say, I love the level of accountability in your report. It's really great where you're showing where you are on each one of these projects and whatever. So thanks for that. And also, I don't know who's in charge of this, but I noticed that the file names for the files for this meeting were much more digestible on my end. I was able to read them much better. And I don't know who made that decision, but I really appreciate it because for some reason I lacked the intellectual ability to enjoy an iPad. And so I have to go to the website before every meeting and download all of those documents, which is nice because then I can read them on my laptop and that's all good. But now that I can read the file names and understand which one is which, it's much better. So thank you for that.
I wish I could take credit for that. I think that's the results of the team and Greg's leadership.
All right. Well, thanks, team.
All right, this concludes staff planned updates on the report agenda. Are there any questions from staff or for staff from committee members before we move on? See none. We'll move on to section 5, questions and comments from the chair, committee members, and staff. See none. Section 6, closed session. Johnny, we have any closed session today?
We do. We're going to go into closed session to talk about the information technology annual penetration test. So we would clear the room except for those that will be presenting and discussing. You give us a moment to turn everything off and we'll start then, Tom? Sure, Tom, do you want to take a little break? Okay, thank you. Rosie, let me know when we can start up in a group. Yeah. You ready, Rosie?
I shouldn't be up here yet. You guys are still.
Hey, Michelle. Oh, okay, sorry.
We are ready to continue.
Thank you, Rosie. We finished closed session and have returned to open session agenda items, starting with Section 7, closed session report. Johnny, do we have anything to report on closed session reports today?
Thank you, Tom. There's nothing to report out of closed session.
All right, thank you, Johnny. We're going to move to Section 8, adjournment. As we come to the end of our agenda, this meeting is adjourned. Our next Business and Governance Committee meeting will be held Thursday, September 12th, no earlier than 9:15 a.m. here at SDCERS Boardroom, 401A Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Good job.
Everybody. When,
You need help?
I got it, thanks.
Lou?
How are you, buddy?
Good, nice to see you. Have you been by Helix at all lately?
No, haven't been lately.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not there anymore, right?
No, I'm gonna go visit tomorrow.
Okay.
After, I'll be here till our meeting